Thanks everybody for your time today. Today I want to talk to you about the future of the video games business. And before I dive in, I'm going to give you a little context about my presentation. For a while after becoming CEO of NEXON about 5 years ago, I kind of disliked, I was CFO before, but then I sort of gave up on analyst briefing for a little bit because I thought I was becoming a waste of time and I had some other things I needed to do around the company. So, but then I later realized how important it is to make sure that our investors understand the fundamental dynamics of what's really going on in the games industry. And I realized that if I can't explain our thesis to you, and NEXON is not the easiest company to understand at first blush, and why we keep on growing and why we keep on getting bigger and having success. If I wasn't able to do that well, then I really wasn't doing my job as a CEO. So please accept my apologies for that. I was new in the job a few years ago. Thank you very much. So my team and I created a couple presentations. This was the first of them. And basically what we did is we poked fun at the industry and what we thought the dumb money was doing when they were investing in video games. And mostly it was about the flashy trends that never really delivered for investors. And the first of these pointed out that the most important ideas and mental models in the video games industry were the ones that were the least valued. For example, we said we thought VR was a waste of time. This was 3 years ago or so. And this is virtual reality. You may have read a thing or two about it. Everybody was talking about it. I couldn't get through a media interview or an analyst presentation without 3 or 4 questions on this topic, usually at the front end. And we said we thought it was going to be a dumpster fire for everybody involved, and at the time it was pretty controversial. And the situation seemed so absurd to us that we ended up kind of making an analogy to Moneyball. If you've ever, I'm sure everybody in this room has read the book at least a couple times, or at least seen the movie. And remember, Moneyball was about how Billy Beane, the Oakland A's, figured out that RBIs and things like that don't really matter, but getting on base does win games. And so it doesn't matter if you're overweight and you're paid $80K a year and you don't really know how to hit a home run, but if you can draw a walk and that helps you get on base, then that's what really matters. And it seemed to us more and more that we felt a little bit like the 2002 Oakland A's over at NEXON. And then that line of thinking seemed to spark a more interesting and valuable discussion and dialogue with our investors. And so a year later, here, we doubled down on that thesis. And we made a presentation where we took dead aim at several of the cliches that were going on in the video games business at that time. And those cliches were very likely to cause you, the investor, to lose money. And the underlying theme of these 2 presentations was that nearly everything that you've learned about video games business in the past is going to cause you to lose money in the future. And we got some discussion about that. It ended up being a pretty useful dialogue with our investors. And you can go back to those presentations. They're on YouTube today. You can see how we did and whether they helped you, the investor, avoid losing money. But I'll make it a little faster for you because each of them is about 45 minutes long. Let's review some of the topics that we took aim at. We said that relying on app rankings as a measure of success was probably a waste of time. And since that time, at least 2 of the companies on the major on the app stores have either gone out of business or are basically dead men walking in terms of how they're doing. The point being that you can push up your revenues while at the process losing money, right? Because like profitability actually counts. 3 years on, VR has an active installed base of roughly 0 million people. And nobody I know, and I know a lot of video gamers of all ages, including my 15-year-old and my 13-year-old, nobody's playing a VR device today. Now, esports, which was a big topic a year ago, it may not yet be the train wreck of VR, but I still can't name any companies that I know that are making a profit out of esports today or are anywhere close to making a profit on esports, even the biggest ones. And it's definitely, you may debate that, but I'm pretty sure our numbers are right based off of what we know around the industry, but it is clearly not becoming the next NFL. And last but not least is the very silly idea that there are 2 tiers of game companies. Those game companies that can afford AAA spending, AAA game spending, and AAA is usually defined as about $100 million in development spend for a new game and about another $100 million in marketing spend, and those that cannot. And if you've been paying attention over the last year, you've seen, or if you have kids who are teenagers like mine, you've noticed that PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, also known as PUBG, or Fortnite have taken a flamethrower to that idea. Neither of those games were anywhere near close to AAA in terms of development spending. So if you had invested your money by using those widely held mental models as guideposts, you probably would have lost money by now. And the point is not that we're saying, I told you so. It's that if there's one thing to know about video games, you really have to examine closely the premises and not follow the cliches. Most of these cliches are made up by people who don't play games and who want to sell you something. So if you don't exercise a lot of skepticism when you hear these things, you're probably going to lose money. So don't be the sucker at the poker table. But I and my team strongly believe that you should invest in video game sector because of all the media industries, it's the biggest, it's growing the fastest, and it's got the highest profit. On the left of this page here, we've got the linear entertainment industry, and on the right, we've got the interactive entertainment industry. And as you can see, interactive entertainment, which is what video games are, some people call this gaming, not to be confused with gambling, although the gambling industry would like you to confuse it with gambling. This is interactive entertainment only. This is video games of the type that we make. It's growing a lot faster, and it's a lot bigger, and it's a lot more profitable. Also, because of all the BS that I was just talking about, it makes for a very target-rich environment for a value investor who knows what they're looking for. And we think the growth is going to accelerate, not because of some pedestrian cliche like esports or VR, but because of deep interactive entertainment is rapidly going from the fringes, that's right, I said the fringes, which is where it is today, to being central to people's lives. This is because we are in the middle of an explosion of new technology that's bigger than anything since the dawn of the internet 25 years ago. These technologies are going to be used in crazy and unpredictable ways by game makers with imagination. And it's from that combination of new technology and imagination are going to come the big hits, hits that dwarf anything that we've seen before. These are the positive black swans of the future. And within the next few years, everything about online games is going to change. How customers access those games, how game operators of online games operate those games, and how we game developers build those games. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk to you about only 3 technology developments that we think are really important. For each one, I'll tell you what it is and why we think it's important to game developers and game publishers, how close it is to reality, and what I think the economic benefits are going to be, since you guys are all investors. And I want to conclude with some ideas about how to make money as an investor and how to lose money. And along the way, I'll tell you what NEXON's strategy is for all this. Okay, so the first is about how customers access games. The topic is platform convergence, and you've probably heard a lot about it over the last couple months, especially in the last week. Yesterday, Apple had an announcement. Last week at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, Google had an announcement, and I'm going to talk about what it means for content creators like us. Oh, sorry, I missed the... Now, platform convergence has been playing out in front of our eyes for the last few years. Think about only 5 years ago. 5 years ago, what did the game world look like? The game platform world. You had 2 levels of machines. You had a high-end PC with a super good graphics card and super good networking card, basically in your PC, whether it's a laptop or whatever. It had really, really good graphics, really good networking layer. And we, the game developer, could render a super deep, immersive online world. If you play games at all, online worlds, you could do a Fortnite or a Battlefield or a World of Warcraft on a game device like that. And then you had, even after the iPhone, even 5 years ago, the iPhone 4, iPhone 5, you had the sort of basically low-end phones. And the good news about that is everybody had one of these lower-end phones, but they didn't have the networking layer, they didn't really have the graphics to provide an immersive game. So as a result, you had a lot of simple games, a lot of simple gameplay style, casual games that people would play, sometimes for a long time, but typically short spans of attention, 5–10 minutes at a time, typically no more than a couple weeks or a couple months for any individual game, not at all like the PC and the console business. Today, what's happening? What's happening today is that the platforms are converging. They are becoming the same device. Look at your iPhone 10. That thing is an amazing computing device. It's a workstation. And we can render a really good game on your iPhone 10. Something with, forget about the graphics layer, that's great, but what's really going on is under the hood, we can render thousands and thousands of people in the same online game world at the same time. Remember, NEXON made its money, made its bones on deep, immersive online games. We see the future of the world in places like China and Korea that had very fast internet very early on. We have players who have played our games for well over a decade now. And so this is a big, big deal that everybody, as Oprah Winfrey said yesterday at Apple, billions of these things in your pocket, that's a big deal for us. If you can pull it out of your pocket and start playing like you do on your PC, why even own a PC? Now, 2 years ago, this was pretty heretical to say, but clearly Apple and the other hardware makers are going in this direction. I was just down at Apple last week. They don't tell you much to us software developers, but clearly they're thinking about this way from what we can gather. And if you look at the Nintendo Switch, it's clearly a convergence device. If you have kids who play the Switch, sometimes they'll play in the backseat of the car, other times they'll play it hooked up to the TV. I play Fortnite with a group of 9th graders in my son's class. 2/3 of them are playing on their mom's hand-me-down phones. The rest of us, myself included, are playing on high-end PC. It kind of doesn't matter. We're all playing on these converged devices. So it's here today. And what's really going to go in the next few years? What's really going on is you're going to take this device, you're going to put it down on your desk, you're going to hook it up to USB-C or hot swapping Bluetooth. You're going to a la carte your input and your output. It's not just going to be on a small device. It's going to be on a big screen, keyboard and mouse. You're already seeing those sorts of hybrid solutions that Apple has been pioneering with the iPad. The latest iPad has USB-C in. It's got Bluetooth keyboard. Those types of things, we think that we're going to see a lot more of this. The point is, you get at the office in the morning, or you get at your home, you put the thing down in front of your screen, you play it any way you want. Or you play it on the bus. This is a big deal for us. And now, everybody's talking about cloud gaming on the horizon. And this has been the talk of the industry lately, especially last week, as I said, at the GDC. No less than 5 companies have announced that they want to be the Netflix of games. Now, I kind of don't understand why anybody would really want to be the Netflix of games. Netflix makes, last I checked, about 4 to 12% operating income margins. That's quite a bit lower than the game developers, but okay. Netflix also got a massive head start. Remember, when they started out streaming movies? Nobody's getting a head start right now. You've got 5 extremely well-capitalized companies all trying to grab this. And also remember that unlike Netflix, you're not just streaming off of a disk. What you're really doing is you have to have a GPU at the head end, at the cloud end. The GPUs are the most expensive part of a PC right now. So for every instance of a high-end game, you have to have a graphics processing unit running that instance. So you have a peak simultaneous user problem. That means you have to buy enough GPUs to run your peak number of users at 7 p.m. in any area where you're running those games. Now, I don't want to scare them away from this business. This is great news for game developers and game publishers. The point is, there's a lot of well-capitalized companies, and they're dead serious about providing this. Ultimately, we think this is great for developers. So we'll see how this plays out, but there are 2 big implications for us as game companies, and therefore for you, the investor. The first is the ability to create and operate game content becomes strategically very important. If you're a content creator and you're good, you've got a commodity that is scarce. Bandwidth isn't scarce. GPUs are not scarce. Money definitely is not scarce, but content is scarce. And specifically, great game content that's differentiated. And second, the ability to make an online game last and grow a really long time. It's not a plentiful thing in our industry. The second is that the total addressable market goes way up. You guys think in terms of TAMs, so do we. Previously, if you wanted to deliver an immersive game, the kind of game that's going to keep people coming back for a very long time, for years on end, you did that on a PC. Now nearly everyone has a device with them all day that will do this and can play a deep, immersive game. Everybody on the planet. Again, billions of pockets out there that have these things in them. And unlike the past, the world is about to be drowning in GPUs and networking that can sustain massive online games. So the TAM of NEXON's business is in the process of exploding, and that's why we're paying very close attention to this. Now, the second major technology development of 3, don't worry, I've only got 3, I'm going to move pretty quickly, is about how game companies operate online games. Again, the world is moving online, so I'm assuming that online is going to be a much more important part of the future. as it already is. But let me go out on a limb. AI is going to change everything. It's massively important for the future of interactive entertainment, much more so in games than in shopping, or suggesting a good movie to you, or suggesting good music that you like to listen to on your Spotify. We're such big believers in AI that we have had a major project going on in NEXON for the last 2 years to wire up all our games to be able to deliver AI tools on top of the tools that are available off the shelf. Now, the thing to remember about online games is that they are very tricky to run. They take a lot of people who are very intelligent and very well trained. A lot of the newcomers to online games, especially in the West and especially in free-to-play, have seen their initially promising games start strong but then drop very quickly. That problem is often, if not usually, about post-launch operations. We call this live game operations. This is a picture of our Japan office that I think Ada-san took a few weeks ago. And they're dealing with an in-game problem. This is what's the content? Are there hackers in the game? Is the event fun? I don't know what these people are doing right now, but they appear to be addressing some sort of problem. These are online virtual worlds, and people are going on adventures in them, and they're managing the thousands and thousands of players. Now, they're communicating with people in the game. They're finding and eliminating gold farmers or in-game bullies or hackers. And it tends to be nerve-wracking work. It tends to require that you get out of bed in the middle of the night to fix something. Now, NEXON has some really smart AI scientists, computer scientists, working on ways to teach the machines how to do the grunt work of all this, or much of this. Their first step was to wire up all the tools to our biggest games. And most of the tools are off the shelf and easily procurable. This is very, very important. It's just like AWS. You go online, you click a few buttons, then you can start to use these tools right away. And they're not expensive. There are multiple vendors who provide great AI and machine learning tools for us that we can use. And I'll give you 2 examples of where we use these tools now that we've set up the infrastructure. And they're going to seem maybe boring at first. They're game changers in our business. It's super important if you're a gamer. Here's a question. Let's say you're new to an online game. Does anybody here play like first-person shooters? Raise your hands. First-person shooters, okay. MMORPGs, massively multiplayer role-playing games? Yes, couple, okay. This looks like a heavy gamer crowd over here. Okay, so let's say you're in a first-person shooter, like let's say Battlefield. Anybody heard of that game? Great game by EA? Okay, awesome. Or Fortnite. Most people have heard of Fortnite. Okay, you get into Fortnite. Now, who do you want to play Fortnite with? Of course you want to play it with people who are about as good as you or a little bit better. But that's not often what happens. What often happens is you step into that cool-looking first-person shooter, like I did with my son and his crew a few weeks ago, and you find you're up against an army of 15-year-old virtual Rambos, and you're not. And come on, did nobody grow up in the 80s like I did? I thought this was funny. My PR team, who were all a bunch of millennials, didn't get the joke at all. They were like, who's this dude with the mullet here? Anyway, it's not actually fun when this happens, as I found out 2 weekends ago. It means that you often don't want to play it anymore because it turns out losing all the time is no fun. And so this is a problem for game companies, because if that happens, you're going to lose your customers. And here's where AI comes in. NEXON's tools that we used, again, using off-the-shelf AI tools, can watch your keyboard and mouse movements and watch how you play in the game. And then it can rank you. It can tell whether you're a good player or whether you're not a good player. And then it'll match you with other people who are roughly as good as you, maybe a little bit better. And that means you're going to stay in the game a whole lot longer. It's a very sort of mundane use of AI. It's not like a HAL, you know, or Westworld, where there's someone talking to you. It's just a very practical use of AI. And you can bring it down to the individual user's capability. You are a different player than you are when you go into a game. And so we want to be able to match you up with the right group of people. And in order to be fun, games have to challenge you, but they have to not challenge you too much. If you have too much challenge, you're going to get frustrated and quit. And if you have too little, you'll get bored and quit. So the technology is here, and we're already using it. And then we have similar technology that recommends friends to you. And just like Spotify and Netflix recommend movies or music to you, our tech recommends in-game friends by watching your play patterns and watching everybody else's. Maybe you like hanging back and healing others. Maybe you like going in and blasting everything in sight. But let's say you like to hang back. Well, there's a guild that needs someone like that. They call it a healer in a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. And maybe you like going on a quest every day at 5 o'clock, and there's a guild of other players who regularly play at that same time. This is important since who you cooperate with is just as important for fun. Who your social network is, your virtual social network, is just as important in the game as who you compete against. By the way, there's a lot more to this. I'm just giving you just the very beginning surfaces. Remember, online gamers will often play a game for several hours a day. This is the types of games we make. Several hours a day for years on end. They're living an alternate life in this virtual universe. And the machines can watch all their play patterns, so we can form a very good profile of their preferences. What are their favorite genres? When do they like to buy stuff? Friday at 3 p.m.? What price point is their sweet spot? And for each player, we can generate very valuable profile. And then we can customize the rewards, the products to recommend, and all sorts of marketing, or even other games to play. Even the most experienced and knowledgeable game operator can't do this sort of thing to the individual level. It takes the machines to be able to do this. So our data scientists think that AI is a lot more important in online virtual worlds than it is for an experience like Netflix. Okay. So I mentioned that after setting up the infrastructure, we've already been starting to implement our new tools. This is a graph of revenue. I could have shown you a monthly active user graph of MapleStory M. We launched the game. It suffered from a couple problems early on. One was it had some bugs that we fixed, and then we also had an explosion in what they call gold farmers. These are bots, basically, that go and they're algorithms that play the game, and they get virtual gold out of the game, and then they sell it online in sort of virtual eBays. And the more bots you have like that, we call them gold farmers, the more that you have, the worse it makes the experience for everybody else. It also tends to cause inflation in the in-game world. Inflation is a problem. We manage inflation just like real economies do. And so you got to get rid of the bots. And to get rid of the bots is very hard. It's very labor intensive. AI can do it much, much better than humans. And thanks to the tools that our team has put together, we've gotten rid of the problem for the most part. It's worked very, very well in the case of MapleStory M. And you can see it's on that sort of bumpy but consistent road up in revenue over time. This is, if I showed you the MapleStory graph from a few years ago, the MapleStory PC graph, which is one of our biggest games, one of the biggest games in the whole industry, it would look very similar to this. So we think we're on a very good path here. We like to see our games go up over time. We don't necessarily, we like to make a lot of money in a short period of time, but that usually bodes ill for the future. We like to see consistent growth over time. So this is great news for us. Now, I recently spoke to a group of investors who asked me whether the technology that I've just been describing will level the playing field for live game operations. We talk about NEXON, about how hard it is to make this stuff, and people say, oh, well, when I can buy the tools off the shelf, everybody can do it, and your hard-won advantage in live ops is going to go away. And I think that's a really good question. My short answer is that in order to use the tools, much less build the tools, you actually have to know what you're looking to accomplish. Think of it this way. If I said, okay, there's a helicopter parked on the roof of this building, and we'll be able to beat the traffic over to Hong Kong Airport this afternoon by just hopping in that helicopter, you'll say, great, I assume there's a driver in the seat, because I can't fly a helicopter. That would be my answer. It's the same thing with online tools. If you want to use a bot sanction tool, you have to know what to really look for in a bot. That comes from experience. And so it's pretty specialized stuff to be able to use these tools, much less develop them. So we talked about how players access games and how we publishers operate games. I'm watching our clock, Yonashima-san. I think I'm 23 minutes in. The third is how game developers build games. And content generation is massively expensive and slow. Why? Think about it for a second. You want to build a virtual game world. We're all going to run around in it. Well, it's going to have trees and mountains and a whole bunch of stuff in it. Somebody's got to paint all those trees and all those leaves on the trees. And the trees have to look good, not just from 5,000 feet when you're flying a helicopter over it. They have to, you're going to jump out of that helicopter, parachute in, attack a bunch of other people. The leaves have to look good when you're right in front of them. The river has to look good. And somebody in the world, typically in China, is painting all those trees and leaves and rivers and mountains and so on. And the industry has largely responded to this problem by throwing bodies at it, by brute force. This is a primary reason why AAA development costs are hugely expensive and those costs are rising fast. Now, post-launch, it can be even worse. If you have an online game world and you want to make stuff that people can buy, a virtual sword, a pet, a tricked-out vehicle, you need to build it and you need to make it look cool enough that people are going to want to buy it. And that's where a lot of our development costs go post-launch. If instead you start with the idea that you don't want to spend $100 million to develop a new game, but you still want to make a really fun game that looks really good, that millions of people are going to like, what do you do? Well, let me give you two examples of what we're doing to develop tools. Typically, they're tools on top of other tools. We live in an object-oriented programming world, so we can take one tool set, we can combine it with our own proprietary tool sets, and the result is radically lower costs and much better quality over time. And that's about content creation. Now, we invested a few months ago in a company called Embark Studios. This was the core development team and the former head of development in Electronic Arts during their good years from about 2012 to about 2018. Patrick Soderlund, who is the head of Embark, just joined our board of directors yesterday. He's probably the single most bankable game developer in the Western world right now, and his studio is working on a lot of these tools themselves. We're sharing a lot of tools and technology and information. And they made a little video that I've taken a little slice of that I'll show you, and I'll let it speak for itself on what they're working on. If I can get the video going here.
What you're looking at is our first environment test. The purpose of this test was to see how far we could push the size and scale of our worlds with a small team using smart techniques and tools. This is a 256 square kilometer terrain with another 3,000 square kilometer backdrop to add to the sense of scale. To build it, we used laser scan terrain data and satellite imagery. With our own in-house tech, we filter out unwanted data from the ground surface satellite image, like bushes and trees. We then used our internal texture synthesis tool to procedurally generate replacement data and added real 3D assets to populate the world. Combined with a procedurally generated snow and weather system, the result is an environment that feels lifelike and dynamic, filled with naturally placed rocks, grass, bushes, and roots.
I cut off the video there. Believe it or not, those volumetric clouds that they showed with just the slider, it hasn't really been done before in the games industry. People actually paint virtual clouds. It's super expensive to do that. And the Embark team just decided, listen, we want to make a AAA game. We just don't want to spend $150 million to do it. It's capitals, actually, even though it's plentiful, it's expensive. We'd like to do it for $30 million. And if we can build the right tools, we can do it. Good news is all these tools are available. You do a little bit coding. If you're intelligent about it, you can build these tools. And so we're very, very excited about what they're working on. Now, the other thing that we're very excited about is about simulated movement. So that was about tools for building a lot of content for these massive virtual worlds quickly. Another major use of technology is AI to simulate a living being within a game world. And if we could do this better, we'd cut out lots of costs and get much better results. And I'll give you a visual example. Hopefully we've turned the sound off for this. Here is motion capture. Has anybody ever seen a motion capture studio before? They put these like ping pong ball things on top of you with a black suit. These are professional motion actors, obviously. But even if you're not a super well-trained kung fu black belt like these guys appear to be, you just want to have a guy, I don't want you to be distracted by this because what I'm about to say is so brilliant. Just someone walking down the street. You're making a game and you have a person who's walking down the street. Well, you'll have a visual actor who will simulate walking down the street because you want that person to walk down the street and then look over their right shoulder and then look over their left shoulder and maybe point and maybe pick up a gun or fall down. That's expensive. You can see all these different people in this. You've got a lot of people in a motion capture studio. Some game companies own their own. Some they go to motion capture places. It's a big, big operation, and you got to plan ahead for all the different moves you want to put in a game. Well, there must be a better way, and you guessed it, AI is the way. And so we've got at Embark a person who specializes in AI, and she's Russian, and her team has started to use okay, let me just describe what I'm showing you here. Think about a baby learning to walk. They see their parents, maybe their mom walking around, and they say, I want to do that, and so they start imitating, and then they fall down over and over again. And then they keep falling down, and they do it for months on end, and then gradually they get a little bit better. Well, what they've done here, you're going to see a gray mannequin walking. The gray is a motion-captured mannequin. That's the reference. The team has wired up Google DeepMind and said, try to imitate that using physically realistic. It's not animation-based. It's called procedural animation. So it's got physics and weight and so on in this virtual world. And now you'll see this mannequin falls over and over again, and then after 2 million training steps, starts to flail a little bit less badly. After 5 million steps, flailing a little less bad. After 10 million steps, well, not so bad. It's not falling over anymore. This is AI. This is how Google DeepMind learned how to play Go. Now it's getting better and better. It still looks kind of like a dork. After 50 million steps, it's starting to get the hang out of this. 100 million steps. Not bad. But as it says, but it's happy to run only using its heels. It hasn't figured out that it can use its toes as well. So that's after 100 million. This was video from, I think they did this last week, is when they finished this up. I was with Patrick yesterday because he came in for the shareholder meeting, so he was able to drop this video in at the last minute. And this is how it gets better over time, over this 100 million steps. I think this is phenomenally cool. Why? Because we don't have to make a reference library of all these different moves. We can just have the computers cycle through themselves. And they are going to be putting this into the game that they are producing, which will come out in somewhere between 18 and 24 months. And this is amazing. So then we can simulate it getting thrown over by somebody else. It can simulate walking. It can simulate crawling. It can simulate jumping, all those types of things it can do. And we don't have to put our heavy lifting into it. We just have to set up the tools, and then the machines learn how to do it themselves. Okay, so now what do all these technologies mean? They can be put to use in many, many different ways, and let me just give you one. I'm not going to try to sell it to you like it's esports is the next big thing and we're going to be there first before anybody. I'm just going to give you one thing that we think is really cool. One scenario is that we're able to finally unlock a truly massive virtual world. This is the kind that has been envisioned in sci-fi for many years, but the game industry hasn't been able to really deliver on. It's a world that you go to at any time in any format. You don't sit down at a clunky old PC. You look at a mobile portable device on a small screen or at a big screen at your desk, or maybe when VR is finally ready, we'll be able to do it on that. So that's pretty cool. Anytime, anywhere. Second, the world is truly massive. Today, if you want to be in a virtual world, you actually render that virtual world on your local machine. You synchronize with all the other local machines, and so that world is limited. It can only be about 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. When you're streaming from the cloud, you can have that world be 40 kilometers by 40 kilometers. And if you blow up a bridge, that bridge stays blown up until somebody goes and fixes it. And so the world is very, very massive. It's truly an alternate universe. The world is entirely tuned to you, tuned to your ability, to what you find challenging and what you find interesting. It's not too challenging. It's not too easy. You're playing with and against other people who are perfectly matched to your abilities and preferences because the AI is able to pull that trick off. And the world is ever-changing. With so much content, you never get bored because we've been able to figure out how to generate content plentifully and a huge variety of it. So I don't know about you. I think this is a world that I can imagine really wanting to inhabit if it's created well. It's not an app that you install. It is a place for you to go. It's there for you anytime. And since even the cheapest device is a portal to this world, everyone in the world will be able to access it cheaply. This is stuff we've been able to do with massively multiplayer online games in low resolution, low bandwidth. We've been able to do it starting 25 years ago with the first MMORPG called Kingdom of the Winds, which NEXON created. And it's something that we can now bring to the rest of the world. But that's just one scenario for what we think the technologies mean. And whether you think that it plays out that way or another way, what is clear is that more than any other time since the dawn of the internet, the games industry is in the middle of a Cambrian explosion of new technology that is very, very useful. And it'll be used in all sorts of ways that are impossible for us to predict today. Now, how will you invest in those opportunities? Let's go back to abundance and scarcity. What's abundant in the world of games right now, and what is scarce? This is very relevant for you as an investor. What's clear is that there's a ton of tech, a lot of money floating around, and there is a proliferation of platforms all trying to get eyeballs. So if you plan on competing on tech, on the basis of tech, or money, or platforms, you are going to face severe competition. And what's scarce? Well, people talk all the time about competition in the video games business, and it is there. But the ability to make an online game world that lasts and grows for a long time is actually one of the scarcest resources on the planet right now. And NEXON is one of the only small handful of companies that have done it repeatedly, even though everyone at this point has tried. There are a few others, but there are not many of us. So I will conclude with how we're approaching this future. Since we are seeing the whole industry in a point of major dislocation, we as a management team have given a ton of thought about how to apply our resources to it. And as you know, whenever you apply risk capital into developing new technology, especially in the technology world, it has to have a huge payout. This is standard crossing the chasm stuff that people in Silicon Valley have been living on for 25 years. If it's not a big potential payout, it's not worth doing. It's not like building a bridge where you can just DCF it very, very easily. But the reality in game development is when you're launching new IP, you are going to lose money or make a little bit of money on several, maybe most of the new games you launch. In a slate of 10, you might lose money on 4, you might make a little bit money on 4, you're basically going to be break even. But on that 10th one, on that 8th or 9th or 10th project, you're going to have a massive hit on your hands if you're pushing yourself. And this is a power law, and it's the exact same situation you see with venture capital. The simple fact of life, plus the huge costs, is what is making new development so scary for game companies right now, because it could sink your profits. You take an impairment, and you have to apologize as a public company. You have to apologize to the street and explain to everybody why you lost money. It's not easy to do as a public company, because nice people like you ask me those hard questions. Now, unlike a venture capital firm, NEXON is in a very lucky position. We generate about $1 billion of EBITDA a year. We have about $4 billion in the bank. That's off of games that have been proven for many years to be incredibly resilient and steady. And since it's so steady, it means that 90% of the revenues come from games that we launched more than 5 years ago. That makes us different than a lot of game companies. Most game companies make more than 90% of the revenues off of games that they launched in the last 2 quarters. And then we put about 7% of our revenues into new game development in 3 buckets. The first is what we call the core. The core is games like you see a lot, games that are firmly in their genre. This is, for us, it's games like Dark Avenger 3 or Axe. The good news about launching a core game is that you know what the usability issues are, you know what the technical issues are, you know how to bring it to market. This is about today's business. The bad news is, so does everybody else. Everybody knows how to launch a core game. They know what it's going to have to look like. It's kind of like opening up a restaurant that's a Korean barbecue restaurant in downtown Seoul. You could be successful, but it's going to be pretty hard. Or a hipster cafe in San Francisco. Then one rung out is what we call stretch. And stretch games are ones where they're breaking new creative ground. Think Minecraft, think Grand Theft Auto when it first came out, think MapleStory, Mabinogi, Dungeon Fighter when they first came out. They're really stretching the creative team. The bad news is you don't know exactly what the user experience is. You don't know exactly what the technical issues are, and it's going to be hard to bring it to market because nobody's brought a game like that to market before. But if you get it right, you get a monopoly. You get the whole market to yourself, and that's therefore where the big hits tend to come from. And then third rung out is what we call frontier, and this is usually underlying technologies that can change things. Again, we think that VR is a waste of time right now. We get asked sometimes about crypto, or at least last year at this time, we used to get asked about crypto at games. We're not spending much time on that. We're spending a lot of time on VR, or excuse me, on AI. So we've been focusing a lot of our efforts around AI, platform convergence, as I said, stretch intellectual property, and NEXON has a ton of intellectual property that has it's got a lot of fans, or tens or hundreds of millions of fans around the world. So as you look at our upcoming slate of new games, oh geez, let's turn it down a little bit. The next big beat for us that we get asked about a lot is DNF Mobile. This is DNF that used to be on PC. On the surface layer, it may not impress you. Underneath the hood, there's a ton of technology that allows an action game like this to happen on a mobile device. Again, this is where the networking layer, especially in a place like China, really, really counts. DNF, by the way, if you're not familiar with NEXON, DNF is maybe the largest game franchise anywhere in the world in terms of life-to-date. It's up there with Call of Duty. It's several $billion bigger in life-to-date revenues than Star Wars. It's clearly the biggest franchise on PC in China right now. Next one up is our next iteration of DNF Dungeon Fighter on a PC. We're using Unreal here as the video game graphics engine. So that's coming up. We're very excited about that. Third, again on mobile because of Convergence, Mabinogi. Mabinogi is a game that is beloved around our core markets, around Korea, Southeast Asia, Japan, and elsewhere. This is a game, as you could probably tell, it's not just about killing everything in sight. It's about cooperation, making music together, and so on. It's an anime-focused game that has had an installed base over its years of over 100 million people. So we're very excited to bring that to mobile. And then we've got Embark, that is a little early to show you. We invested in Embark we announced it about 3 months ago. And it's early to show you what they're working on, but I think, other than the technology that I showed you before, but I think it's going to blow your mind when you see it. We just added Patrick Soderlund to our board yesterday. We think that he is going to stretch us in many, many different ways. We think that the stuff that they're working on is really exciting. What he wanted, what he'll tell you he wanted, was he wanted to learn how to make his games last and grow for a long time because he's making very, very large virtual worlds. We think this is going to revolutionize the industry. It's going to be on all sorts of different platforms. And this is the future of direction of NEXON. So I promise to conclude, I know I've only got a few minutes, about how investors should think about all this. What does this all mean? Start by subjecting every cliche you've ever heard to harsh interrogation. The more times you read about a hot topic in Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal, the dimmer your view should be. Remind yourself how enthusiastic they were about VR 2 years ago or about Facebook games in 2010. Then, after you've cleared your head as an investor, go to the user experience. How does the user benefit from this technology that you're talking about or this new game that you're talking about? What is the user really doing? What's cool for the user? If you can't answer that question very clearly, it's probably not a business. And just because a bunch of sports team owners who have a long-term declining business think esports is big, it doesn't mean that people are going to go to arenas consistently like they do in football, or that they need announcers that sound like a younger version of John Madden. Maybe those fans just end up watching Twitch stuff at home. And just because Mark Zuckerberg spent $3 billion to buy a virtual reality company doesn't mean you necessarily want to wear one. And then finally, ask yourself, what is abundant and what is scarce? Gravitate to what is scarce. Now, I just got back from GDC last week, and pretty much everyone thinks that the games industry is going to change as much in the next 5 years as it did in the last 25 years. You'll hear Andrew Wilson at EA say that. You'll hear Bobby Kotick at Activision say that. We all believe that it's true. And this means severe dislocation for the industry. And the biggest things that you hold to be true will no longer be true. This is right out of Andy Grove. But it also makes for a time of unprecedented opportunity for those with a clear vision. And there has never been a better time, I think, for investors, and there's never been a better time to be a game company. So I've never been so excited about the future of the games industry, and I've never been more excited about Nexon's future. And with that, I guess we have time for one question or so. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Owen. It's quite a new and a very impressive presentation. I will take a question from the room. Just a remind, no, not allowed the question from the media. Just remind. Okay.
Thanks. Great presentation. I'm curious. You know, up until now, a lot of the market cap, a lot of the economics have gone to the Western publishers.
Yeah.
And as you know, as the gaming industry shifts more towards these large format virtual worlds, do you think the core competency actually shifts to Asia?
Yeah.
Because the Asian gamers, Asian gaming companies have lived in this environment.
Yeah. So very quickly, so we can take one more question. I think the answer is yes and no. My game developers in Asia will say, in Korea and Japan, will tell you, hey, we've got a lot to learn from the West. And Patrick and his team at Embark, which again was a core development team at EA until a few months ago, they'd say we've got a lot to learn from the East. So our thesis on that is we want to kind of a yin and yang. We want to combine the best of each. There are some companies in Asia who are very forward-thinking. I would put Nintendo on that list. I mean, to the extent that Japan is Asia, but I think that is the case. I think everybody's struggling with that. But online virtual worlds are hard to do. And they're hard in sort of under the hood, the engine room. So I think both have a lot to learn. One more?
One more question. From the room. Okay.
Thank you. I want to know your view on the cloud gaming. That is, you can play the games in any platforms.
Yeah.
And there is some big internet giant try to adopt a Netflix style of the game subscription. That is, you pay a monthly subscription, then you can access to any game.
Yeah.
So of course this will squeeze your profit margin. So
our profit margins?
Yes. So
no, it won't squeeze our profit margins.
What?
That's definitely not going to happen. No, I think this is the best. As I said earlier, I think this is the best thing to happen for us. Listen, to the extent that there is an analogy to Netflix and linear entertainment to online games, ask who wins and who loses. I know a couple of actors agents in Hollywood, and what they will tell you is never in their lives did they think that life would be so good for writers and directors and actors, for their clients. They are like, my God, I've never seen anything like this over the last 8 years since Netflix and Amazon got really active. So if you're a content creator, it's wonderful. And game developers are content creators, not just when a game launches, but on an ongoing basis. There is no game. We could not keep DNF or MapleStory or any of these games going if we weren't constantly updating the content. Who got really hurt in that situation were sort of the owners of collections of intellectual property. The company, I think it was Paramount who owned Gulf and Western, who owned 2001: A Space Odyssey. They're not adding any value from that point on. They just own it. So they take a broker's fee. So they're basically getting disintermediated. But the content creators, again, writers, directors, actors, are wonderful. We're like that. We don't just sit back and fire and forget. So that's great. And we're already seeing, that's to the extent that there is an analogy to Netflix of gaming. Now remember, there may not be. For one, Netflix started out, and then a couple years later, Amazon started zooming up, and now you got Disney and all the others, and it's like sort of, but you've got one big one. You don't have that case. I mean, I could go back to my earlier slide. You don't have that case here. You've got 5 major companies plus EA all saying they want to be the Netflix of gaming. All of them have hundreds of billions of dollars or tens of billions in the bank, and they're all coming to us, and they're saying, we want your content. That is happening today. And if you look at what happened last week at GDC, why did Google make that massive announcement that we're all reading about? Why? Because they need content developers. It's Vapor today. It's not anywhere close to market. Why would they announce Vapor like that? Because they need content developers to do it. And then Phil and Jade are going around trying to sign up everybody that they can. So I think it's the best time ever to be a game developer.
Okay, the time has come, so maybe a closing. Thank you for joining today, and put your big hands to Mr. Owen. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much.